Realize I'm taking a bite of dessert. As the video comes on, I'm like, oh, I'm right into the microphone. Sorry, people online. Wow. Good evening, and sorry online again for chewing into your ear. Let me know online if you can hear me well, or if you can hear me too well. We're playing with some audio stuff the last week or so. So, welcome. This is our second session on Daniel. All right, but first, we have an embarrassment of riches here. Let's see, let's go, the first dessert we've got up there. This is courtesy of Christine. It is a Irish cream mocha brownie.
It's very good.
It's a bit over the top. And I go to the next one. And then Carrie brought in this rhubarb crisp crunch. Yeah. Rhubarb deliciousness is what we're calling it. So yeah, we've got, see, this is what you miss out on when you don't come and be live with us. All right. Thank you, buddy. All right, you can hear me just fine online. Good, okay. All right, so tonight we've got chapter 2. So last week we had kind of the introduction to Daniel, and it was Daniel and his diet. Daniel and eating the food that he requested so he wouldn't have to defile himself. Gave us a little introduction. Now, second chapter is another self-contained. Every chapter, except for the last 3, are self-contained events or visions. The last 3 chapters are one single vision. So chapter 2 is the next chronological, self-contained event in the life of Daniel in exile in Babylon. So it's a little bit longer, but we should be able to get through it tonight. We'll see. It's pretty straightforward, actually. This is the first dream that Daniel is going to interpret for Nebuchadnezzar. And I mentioned it, I think, last week, that Daniel is, especially his visions, anytime we got the visions going on in Daniel and he interprets them, it is considered apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic meaning revelatory, that he's revealing something of God, the end times, all this stuff. Now, because it is apocalyptic literature, it is just prime for people to take it and run with it and come up with all sorts of crazy ideas about it, and I'll touch on it a little bit. But for our purpose, well, for anybody's purposes, but especially as we're going through this, his vision points to Christ, and we'll see this. Points to God, no biggie. So chapter 2, we'll just dive right in. Well, any questions, comments, concerns? Anybody need to get up and get some desserts? We need to, next time actually, yeah, we'll have drinks next time too. Maybe we'll have wine and cheese. Who knows? We'll do all sorts of fun stuff. Pretty soon it's going to be Wednesday night little getaway with maybe some Bible study if we get around to it, maybe. All right. So let's bring up the first slide. All right, this is verses 1 through 3. In the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. All right, so he has dreams. But not just any dreams. He has this very troubling dream that he just can't get out of his head. It has really struck him. He can't sleep. It is weighing heavily, and he knows that this dream is something significant. So much so that he has calls all the magicians, who is it? The magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. He summons them all to try to explain to him what this dream means. Now, so these are all wise men, ancient world wise men, magi, So magicians, enchanters, diviners, people who are in the occult arts and whatnot, astrologers. And then we get these Chaldeans, which is kind of an interesting little addition to the group. Chaldeans can mean a few different things depending on when we're talking about them, or who's mentioning them, or even how you're talking about them. Because the Chaldeans initially were, so if you have all of, here's all of Babylon and here's all the Babylonians living in there, the Chaldeans would be like a little group that was towards the south. I think they were, Babylon was kind of, Iraq, where Iraq is now. So they're kind of in the southern portion of wherever that border was. So the Chaldeans were kind of a group amongst Babylonians initially. Over time, and a couple kings of Babylon were Chaldeans, and so as time goes on, Chaldeans become a shorthand for just Babylonians. So if you mention the Chaldeans, it could just mean you're talking about people of Babylon. Partially because some of the kings were Chaldeans, and they kind of rose in prominence, so it became a thing. But it also can refer to Chaldeans, and what this usage is really using is kind of a subset of Babylonians it was more of a social class. So well-educated, a little bit higher in the social stratus, or status, whatever. And so they're kind of being lumped in with the magicians, the diviners, the enchanters. So these probably would be where we would really classify them just more as wise men or magi. Same thing. So that's what we're talking about. So he pulls everyone in. Anybody who could possibly interpret a dream, he drags them all in. Any questions about that? Straightforward, easy peasy. See, we'll get through this easily. And we had a comment online. What's special about the Chaldeans? I assume I'm just now seeing the message, so hopefully this answered the question. I will try to pay more attention to the questions as they come in, so sorry, Mom. That's what's special about the Chaldeans. What we're referring to is just a special group of well-educated, wise people. All right, next slide. We got verses 4 through 6. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, so Chaldeans are kind of prominent here, "O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation." The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, "The word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and its interpretation." All right. So the Chaldeans pipe up real quick, and they say, Oh, king, live forever. Now, granted, this could be and it was kind of a customary way. If you're addressing a king, it's not only customary, but also probably a good idea to butter him up a little bit. You don't want to tick off the king right away. So it is a customary greeting. It is a good kind of honorary for addressing the king. But also, as we will see, Daniel's the one recording all this. And there are some details, like he keeps the narrative going pretty quick. He doesn't fill in all the little details everywhere. But he does include their greeting to him. And there does seem to be a little bit of satirical irony going on here. Because as we see, and what we'll find out when Daniel interprets a dream, is that the point of the dream is like all of your kingdoms, your kingdom and all the kingdoms of the world will end. God's kingdom is the only eternal one. God's kingdom will last forever and ever. So it is kind of interesting that Daniel includes this little thing where the Chaldeans are like, "Oh, king, live forever." And Daniel's kind of like, "Yeah, right." It is sort of a little, kind of a little jab that Daniel's getting in. Now, he's writing after the fact, so, it's not like, it was in the moment. But as he's recalling it, he is kind of including at the very beginning kind of a sneak peek at what's going to be happening. Like, okay, king live forever. All right, cool. Points out that he answered in Aramaic, and this is where we get the shift from Hebrew to Aramaic. All right, and we talked about that a little bit last week, where the narrative occurs in Aramaic. The interesting thing is that what we have here is the shift from into Aramaic occurs when Daniel's going to start interpreting this dream. And what we're going to see is that it comes from God, right? God delivers dreams, or God is the source of all this stuff. So the message, God is speaking this dream, Daniel's interpreting this dream for Nebuchadnezzar. The message is coming in from God, but in the language of the people, the language of the pagan nation, the language of the world that Daniel's a part of. So it's just interesting that God is speaking now to the world in its own language. But the fun thing is that the world is not going to get it. So even though he's speaking, and in the context of the narrative and what Daniel's actually writing, he's writing now in Aramaic. So he's showing that the message is coming into the world in the world's language. The king's not going to get it. Okay? The people of Babylon aren't going to get it. Which is very similar to what? In the New Testament.
Oh, yeah. Parables?
Parables, yes. There we go. If I had a... There we go. Oh, okay. Yes. Where Jesus... Get rid of that one. Jesus speaks plainly, speaks the language of the people, but they don't get it. It's hidden. So in the same way, Daniel's interpretation of the dream is going to be very easy to understand. I mean, he's going to explain it in a way that Nebuchadnezzar has no doubt whatsoever what the dream means after Daniel explains it. But he doesn't get it. He doesn't really follow, and it doesn't cause any kind of inner conversion or anything like that. So it's very similar to what Jesus does with the parables. So yeah, we see that kind of going on with this shift to Aramaic. Speaking, yeah?
Aramaic was not the language of the Babylonians.
At the time, they were, well, Aramaic became, it was one of the languages used, actually, it was spoken language, very popular and kind of over all the Middle East at that time. Their writing was Akkadian, I think, or one of their forms of writing, I don't know. But they were speaking Aramaic. What happened later was, as the Jews come back from exile, Aramaic kind of started to infiltrate their language, because Aramaic and Hebrew are very similar the roots were the same. So they're Semitic languages that were very similar. So you get a lot of Aramaic loan words, which is why, like, even in the Gospels, there'll be a mention like, oh, in Aramaic, the place was called this. Because that's what, like, Jesus, the apostle, that's what they were speaking, was Aramaic. Which is actually fun, because even by the time Jesus comes around, the Hebrew, or the Israelites, are speaking Aramaic. They're no longer even speaking Hebrew. As a common language, Aramaic was the thing. Hebrew was the religious, official, political language. And then, of course, things were then written in Greek. So we had a whole bunch of stuff going on. So, yes.
In the New Testament, if you went to the synagogue, was it in Hebrew?
If you went to the synagogue in the Old Testament, yes, you'd hear Hebrew.
In the New Testament?
In the New Testament, I believe so. Yes. I believe, in the synagogue, Hebrew was still the language of...
So Jesus had to know both Aramaic and Hebrew?
I'm pretty sure most people probably did, because they were very similar. It wasn't like exact, like one-to-one kind of connections with the words, but I mean very similar, and likely understood at least the religious stuff.
It's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar believed in the supernatural, because he's asking them to tell the dream.
Yeah.
But he didn't trust the Chaldeans.
No. And it's that you bring that up. We'll kind of touch on that a little bit. How there is this kind of, there's a belief that this is divine, that this is coming from the gods, that there is a belief in gods and supernatural and all that. But it's very interesting how they confess that, but they don't. It's questionable how firmly they grasped it, even among their own religion. It's very interesting, but they didn't trust anybody because he wanted to. He wants them not only to interpret the dream, but to tell him what the dream was. It's like, okay, well, he knows he knows that anybody could make it up. Well, I mean, I was trying to think of a dream I had recently that I could share. I'm like, I don't know, you explain it to me because, but all my dreams lately have been just very boring. It's like, I know what it is. It's because we had KFC before we went to bed, and so I had indigestion, so that's what that dream was about. I mean, that was really easy to interpret. I didn't need a wise man for that. So I woke up in the morning and, oh gosh. But yeah, he knew anybody could just make something up. So he wanted them to be able to tell him what his own dream was, like what actually happened. So it indicates he knows that it's supernatural. So he knows it's from a divine origin, and he wants them then to exercise their divine powers too, to be able to discern and receive from the gods the interpretation. So really, he's looking at these people as like, you are just the lightning rods. You know, you get the divine wisdom and you tell it to me. Because he clearly doesn't trust in their own individual, like their own wisdom. So at least he is sort of going beyond that. But he does put out there that, hey, and if you fail, not only am I going to rip you limb to limb, but your house too. Which is not the greatest incentive for somebody to step up. Because if they screw up, and as we'll see, they're very concerned about this. So next slide. Verses 7 through 9. They answered a second time and said, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation." The king answered and said, "I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation." So I love the counteroffer there. They're like, hey, tell you what, just tell us what it is. We'll tell you. Trust us, right? We'll tell you what it means. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, no. No, because he knows. He's like, you're just going to lie to me. You're going to tell me exactly what I want to hear. And so he knows this is a supernatural thing. He does not want to hear what he doesn't want them to tell him what he wants to hear. Oftentimes, kings, people in the high, they just want to be, just tell me I'm pretty, that kind of thing. But he knows that, hey, I want the truth. I want to know exactly what this means, whether it's good or bad. And as we will see in the interpretation that Daniel gives, it's not great for him. But he still wants to know because he knows it's important. He knows it's from somewhere up there. So he's like, I need to know. And I can't waste time with you guys who are just going to blow smoke and tell me exactly what I want to hear. So just shut up and tell me my dream. And they're going to say no. Any questions so far? All right. Next slide. 10 through 13. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand, for no great and powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh." Because of this, the king was angry and very furious, and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. All right. So they come back and like, look, we can't do it. What you ask is impossible. Nobody can do it. There's not a man on earth who can do this. Okay? And they point out, no king, great and powerful as he might be, has ever asked even such a thing. Because even the great and powerful kings know it can't be done. Which is not the smartest thing to kind of suggest that there are other, great and powerful kings who are smarter than you. So the Chaldeans are not really they're not very wise. The king asked a difficult thing. Now here's the fun part. No one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. All right, so there are gods, right? According to them. Where do they dwell? Not with flesh. So they have a fundamental misunderstanding of God, clearly. I mean, obviously they're pagans, they believe in multiple gods, whatever. But it just shows just how divorced from reality these guys are. Because there is one God, and where does he dwell?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, but especially with our flesh. You could even say in our flesh, takes on our flesh, which would have been, very foreign notion that a God would sully himself with this and would clothe himself in our flesh. So,
Would he do that? I thought it was after Jesus, then he might.
well, no, this is before. This is well before Jesus, but
Yeah,
it's still God is the one who dwells with the flesh.
Before Jesus?
Oh, absolutely, because what we have at that time is God is in the tabernacle. He's dwelling with the people in the tabernacle as they move around. Well, by the time they get to Daniel, he's at Jerusalem. So they built a temple. So the Ark of the Covenant is in the temple. God's dwelling place is right there in Jerusalem amongst his people. So even right before you even get to Jesus and you get with God in the flesh, you have God dwelling with flesh. Because their point is only the gods can interpret this dream, and they don't live with us. They're far away. And Daniel, you can imagine him in the corner smirking like, no. Yeah. They don't know anything because they're nothing. There is a God who can tell you what it is, and he dwells with his people. He is here amongst his people. So it shows how they can't even fathom that this dream is able to be interpreted. They say it's impossible. It just cannot be done. They say not even the gods can do it. Or they say that the gods can do it, but they don't dwell with the flesh. So they're removed, detached. We can't even access them, which for a wise person and a pagan astrologer is probably not the greatest thing to say to your guy who he trusts in your divination powers. But he's like, the only way is through these guys, and they're not even, no. So no, there is a God who can do it, and he is here. They can't see how it's even possible because their underlying assumption about the gods themselves, well, God is wrong. It's basically like, when you perform an experiment, and you've got all your assumptions, right? And this is what you build your experiment on. Well, if any one of those assumptions is flawed or wrong, the whole experiment is flawed, right? Same thing here, which, if you want to have a larger discussion about even just the way the world sees things, the way the world understands things, it's like we shouldn't expect the world to really get any of this. Certainly nothing we talk about in here, even the basic stuff, not even the deep things of God, but even the basic stuff that we talk about here, we should not expect the world to understand because their whole understanding is built on a whole bunch of flawed foundation. So everything that they've kind of built up is just, it falls apart because it's built on faulty assumptions. Flawed reasoning and flawed logic, which is fun because, of course, they look at us Christians and be like, oh, you're not logical or reasonable at all. You build nothing on reason or logic. And we're like, yeah, we do. Trying to think of a good joke. Anyway. So, they are convinced that it can't be done, which just angers Nebuchadnezzar even more. And now he's like, okay, not only the person who gets it wrong, I'm going to go, but I'm just going to destroy all the wise men. Every enchanter, every magician in the land, I'm going to kill, including Daniel and his buddies. And the assumption here is that Daniel has shown that he can interpret things, that his buddies are kind of fulfilling this role. So this is where Daniel and the three get brought into it. Any questions, comments so far? Cool. All right. Next slide. This is verses 14 through 18. Yes. Then Daniel replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. All right, so prudence and discretion. You know, we saw in chapter 1 that Daniel was very wise, and remember, he's a young kid. He was a teenager when he was brought into Babylon, so he's late teens. At the youngest, he's in his late teens, maybe early 20s at this point, but this is the second year, so he's still a kid. So he's acting very wisely. Prudence and discretion does not challenge the king's authority. You know, like the other guys were. The Chaldeans were like, "Oh, please, what you ask can't be done." You know, you never tell a king you can't do something, right? Doesn't challenge the king's authority, doesn't challenge the king's judgment. In fact, he just asks about the urgency. You know, doesn't cast any judgment on the dream or the interpretation or the rashness of, "I'm going to destroy all the magicians," nothing. He's like, "Hey, just find out why it's such a big, urgent deal." Not even a big, I mean, it's a big deal. Why? What's the urgency? Okay. He's gathering information. You know, this is a very common sense sort of thing for us. Like, hey, before you go marching into a situation, find out some stuff. Ask some questions. This is very reasonable kind of stuff. He requests the king to appoint a time. So he even goes to the king, and which shows that he's like, "Hey, I can do this for you. Just let me know when." Which is another kind of nice little move that he does here, because obviously he knows that it's urgent because this guy, Arioch, has come to kill everybody, right? So Daniel doesn't plead, doesn't panic. He's like, hey, go back to the king and tell the king, "Oh yeah, just name the time and we'll be there." So he's buying himself a little bit of time, you know, some breathing room, but also just kind of trying to, hey, let's bring things down. Let's not act rashly. Let's just calmly take these in stages. Gives him also time to inquire to God. You know, to go to God and say, "Hey, God, tell me what the dream's about. Inform me so I can interpret this for him." Then Daniel goes and he shares it with his buddies. Which, well, why is that a good thing? Just in a common sense sort of.
Prayer, intercession.
Yeah. Praying with friends. I mean, it's always good to have support, right? You know, oftentimes we just kind of soldier on, do our own thing, and like it's me against whatever. It's like, no. We've got a whole congregation. We've got a whole family here. Nobody, yeah, and this is like any of whatever people are going through in their lives, troubles you're facing, conflicts, whatever. It can often feel like, "Oh wow, I'm all alone. I have to handle this." You know, good Lord, I not even seeking out prayer doesn't always happen. I have a handful of people who come to me and like, "Hey, can you pray with me?" It's like, yes, I can. I can do lots of stuff, and that is definitely one of them. But nobody in this church should ever approach anything feeling like I'm alone, or I don't have anybody I can turn to, or I have to handle this by myself. Even if it is literally something that only you can do, that nobody could actually put their effort into it, you can always go to somebody and ask for prayer, for them to carry that burden of prayer with you, for you. Oftentimes we don't even have the words. Like, you're so stressed you can't pray. Cool. Find somebody. Every Sunday there's about 80 other people who can do that with you. I'm happy to. I've got a weekly standing phone call with one of our members to pray. It's awesome. You know, we can schedule this stuff out. It's fine. But yeah, he goes to seek mutual support. Prayer, but also just moral support. You know, he knows that he's not alone in this. Smart kid. Teenagers were built different back then. Um, and then, oh, the cool thing there also is, all right, what does it say in verse 18? He told them to do what? Seek mercy. From whom? God. Isn't that interesting? Who's the one trying to kill him? Nebuchadnezzar. You'd think you'd want to go to Nebuchadnezzar and seek mercy. No. Who are they seeking mercy from? God. Because Daniel knows, hey, nothing is happening apart from God's will. And even with Nebuchadnezzar saying, I want you dead, Daniel can look at that and say, well, it's a God thing. I have to ask God for mercy. Because if Nebuchadnezzar is going to kill me, he's only going to do it by the will of God. God will allow him to kill me, or God will allow him to spare me. Either way, it's God's deal, not Nebuchadnezzar's. So, this is the beautiful thing about Daniel. To Nebuchadnezzar, to the public-facing side of him, he's perfectly kind, obedient, respectful. Oh, king, all this kind of stuff. He's like doing saying all the right things to show himself to be a loyal subject. But privately, he's like, I know, he's not in charge. Nebuchadnezzar, God's the one. I'm going to appeal to God. We're going to go to him. God's the one who's got this. And that's going to be the recurring theme. God has got this. God has got this. He's the one to seek mercy from. Really cool stuff there. Especially just that, seek mercy from God, so that we might not be destroyed. So even that he's coming together to intercede for all of their benefit. Because it includes them too. They're going to get killed, so why keep them in the dark? Questions, thoughts about that section? This is easy. Daniel's a piece of cake. All right. Oh, wait. I jumped ahead. Okay. Next slide. Verses 19 through 23. All right. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. All right, so God answers prayer. Lesson 1. Answered his prayer, gave him exactly what he asked for. Gives Daniel a vision of the dream. Now, we have some cool parallels going on here, because we know this is from God, right? Everything's from God. So who gave Nebuchadnezzar the dream? God. All right, comes from God. Comes to him at night, right? During a dream. What is Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to the dream?
He's,
Fear?
fear.
Troubled? Angry even? Oh, and then leading from that, he tries...
Bewildered.
What's that?
He's bewildered.
Bewildered? Yes, absolutely. And how did he try to seek the understanding of the dream? He went to
The sorcerers.
the sorcerers, yes, which made him even more angry. Daniel, the interpretation comes to him in a dream at night. He wakes up, and what is his response?
He thanked God.
Thank you, God. He prays. Yeah, he blesses God. He praises God. And who did he turn to for the interpretation? God. So yes, Daniel is doing everything the right way. So we got this really cool parallel thing going where it's like, here's Nebuchadnezzar. This is the way the world, this is the way the world handles this stuff. And here's Daniel. And the whole thing about Daniel, the whole book, is this is how you live as a faithful person in an unbelieving world. So the parallels are intentional. This is what he's teaching is, okay, wrong way, right way. So yeah, everything kind of matches up there, and God delivers this. The prayer itself is kind of fun grammatically because it's rendered in a poetic form. So even in the way Daniel has constructed this, is the narrative has been kind of going to do, it's pushing along. He's left out some details here and there, like Arioch just sort of appears. There's no background given there. A lot of the details just kind of come out, and the pacing is a little quick. Well, now the prayer comes, Daniel's prayer of praise and thanksgiving, and that slows everything down. That kind of hits the brakes. And the cool thing is because the prayer is actually the heart of the text. Not only is it at the very center of the text, but it is the heart of the text. The dream, I mean, it's informative, but it's like, we even when Daniel explains it, like, we know that. It's the dream of giving thanks to God, knowing that God is the one who gives wisdom. God is the one who, this is beautiful. So look back at that text. He says what? Okay. He removes kings and sets up kings, which is fun coming from Daniel because God removed the Judean king and set up the pagan king Nebuchadnezzar. So even in all this, Daniel is acknowledging, like, yes, God sent the exile. God has put us here in this horrible place to suffer like this. Praise be God, because he's in charge of all this. And God's going to do it again when he sets up a Persian king, Cyrus, to come in and conquer Babylon, to then send the Judeans back to Judah, and then to resettle in Israel. So he's acknowledging in all of this that Nebuchadnezzar is only there because God has allowed it. So yeah, this is a great thing. It slows everything down. The focus is now on the prayer. Talks about God being worthy of blessing and praise. You know, he is over all things, time, kings, all this. God exercises and grants power and wisdom. He is in control. And God is to be thanked and praised because he answers prayer. You know, the wise men, Babylonians had, they had hundreds of gods. Depending on who you asked. They had a god for just about everything. Did the wise men bother? And the wise men acknowledged that gods had the knowledge, right? Only the gods know this. Did they bother going to their gods?
No, they just recognized it.
Yeah. Right. Which is why I said it's questionable even how seriously they held to their beliefs. Because, good Lord, if you had a pantheon of gods and you were like convinced, like, hey, the gods have this knowledge. Well, sacrifice something, burn something, I don't know. Kick a cat, I don't know, whatever your religion does. I don't know where that came from. But they did weird stuff to make their gods happy. But yet, do something. But they didn't even bother. So either they realized, like, well, their gods really don't know, or they didn't really believe it, or they were like, our gods don't listen to us, which even then is like, then what's the point? Your God is ineffective. Why do you bother? I thought my mom might respond to that. Kick a cat. That's the first thing that came to mind. I don't know why. Okay, it was better than what they used to do where they like sacrifice their babies and their children to Molech. That would be dark, but no, kick a cat and I get comments online. I thought that was the nicer way to go. Anyway, so yeah, they just they're not even trying, and it shows just how baseless and flawed all this stuff is. And Daniel never once questions this. It comes up and he's like, okay, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to God. I'm going to God first. And he trusts that God will give him the answer. And you know what? Actually, he trusts in God. Let's just leave it at that. Because the thing about Daniel is he trusts that God is either A, going to give him the answer and he'll live, or God will not give him the answer and he'll die. Either way, who cares? God's in charge. God's got Daniel. So whether he lives or dies, what matters is faith. These guys don't have it. They don't have it in their own gods. So yeah, crazy stuff going on here. Just Yeah, these guys are just ridiculous. All right, comments, questions. Away from the cat thing. Let's move quickly. All right, next slide, verses 24 through 26. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? All right. Daniel follows all the protocols. Okay, goes to Arioch, who was appointed to take this out, and he says, okay, bring me before the king, get me an audience, and I will do this. All right, goes to the one appointed over him, shows humility. You know, he says, bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. He's not cocky about it. He's not like, hey, He's very kind of chill about this. Arioch takes some credit. What does he say? Ooh, I found the guy. Which probably in his head is like, hey, maybe I'll get a little something for the effort. Although the risk would be if Daniel screws up. See, I'm not sure that process completely, because I'd be like, this guy says he could do it. Oh. Yeah. But if we go back to chapter 1, God had given Daniel favor in the eyes of everybody. Everybody Daniel encountered, people were like, oh, this guy's the man. So maybe Arioch was like, oh, I got a feeling. But anyway, what we actually do see is, Arioch has, he is, I found someone. I've done it. I found him. But even in Daniel's response, he doesn't really say, he says, I will show the king the interpretation. He's not saying, I know, I have the interpretation. He's not like claiming it for himself. In fact, the way he uses it is, I will show it to the king. I will lead the king. So even in his response, it's kind of this, it's a softer sort of like, I'm gonna bring you through it. I'm gonna show it to you. I'm gonna teach you. So there is this kind of very humble vibe going on with Daniel, that he's not just, puffing himself up. But there's more going on here. All right, next slide, verses 27 through 30. Daniel answered the king and said, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this, and he who reveals mysteries made known to you what it is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have, more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. All right. So before even getting into the interpretation, Daniel points to God. Always giving credit to God. So he says, there's nobody can explain this to you, but there is a God in heaven who reveals everything. And even telling him that God has made known to king. So God is responsible for this dream. God has given you this dream. Okay? So he's always tying things back to God. It is not my wisdom, so again, very humble. So he's, whether this is humility or he's like trying to distance himself, I like to go with humility. But it's true. It's like, this is not my wisdom. He's not saying, I'm so smart, which is actually pretty good because, he's not setting himself up for failure later where the king's like, whoa, what does this mean? And you're like, I don't know. Because it's not coming from Daniel. It's coming from God. So he's giving the credit to God in all things. And he says, God has granted me understanding for the purpose to make it known to you, king. And the really cool thing there is God's purposes here is to reveal his word to pagans, to reveal his word to people who don't know him, and really reveal his word knowing that it's not going to change Nebuchadnezzar. The point is he's getting the word out. But the cool thing there is even in that, because we could look at that and say, oh, well, his word doesn't change Nebuchadnezzar. His word's going to people who don't believe it anyway. But what is, does God's word ever go out and not accomplish what it goes out to accomplish? No. His word always accomplishes. Exactly. So whether or not Nebuchadnezzar heeds it or not, God's got purposes. And really the purpose is to let Nebuchadnezzar know what's going on. Plain and simple. It's not rocket science. Questions so far? Comments? We're just having I'm having a good old time. You guys might be. I don't know.
You're explaining it very good.
Cool. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll get to the vision now. So maybe we'll see how it goes. Let's make some space. Have to draw a sheep pretty soon. I still got it on there.
Kind of
Okay.
interesting the way he approached it. He didn't put it in the light that, put it more in the light that God, who was somewhat special even in the pagan's mind, has come to the king.
Yeah.
So the king's an important guy.
Right.
So there's a special relationship, why so the king is going to feel like involved in it. Right?
Good point. Yeah.
So there's some positive attributes to that relationship. Daniel says, okay, this has happened to you. If I can help you reveal what's going on.
And actually
It's
in-
kind of an interesting twist on it.
It is, and leading from that is you see how God is not. Every nation had their god or gods, and they were always the enemies. The gods would, if your god fought for you and won, then okay. And honestly, if you were taken captive, your gods or their gods became your gods. You kind of were brought in. So gods were always against you. And yeah, the God in heaven is not really against Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, he's against sin, absolutely. But Nebuchadnezzar is only there because of God. And God has allowed him to be mighty and powerful and great. So now, in unbelief, obviously, God is not thrilled about that. But God is merciful. God is not withholding anything just because he's a dirty Babylonian. So in that way, he's showing kind of the character and nature of God, which is a twist that they wouldn't have been expecting. Because especially, and really glorifying the God of Israel, because the God of Israel was defeated as far as the Babylonians were concerned. Babylon came in and they had their way with the people of Judah. They've conquered everybody they went out to conquer. So the God of Israel is like, he's not better than us. We've got much better gods. But now he's like, oh, there's something to this. All right. Next slide, 31 through 35. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So, now it's not explicit that it's a statue of a person, but we're going with that. So we have the head of gold, right? The torso is what?
Silver.
Silver. All right, and then we got chest and arms, silver. Then we got, he's wearing shorts, bronze. And then his feet are sticking out. And these are iron and clay. Iron and clay. Okay. So he sees this huge image, statue. Terrifying. It's bright, it's terrifying. All right. And then a little stone gets thrown and actually thrown at his feet, right? Demolishes the feet, and then everything else comes crashing down on top, and everything shatters. And then this stone then becomes a mountain over all the earth. That's why you came. It's not for the desserts, it's for the artwork. All right. So we've got 4 different parts. The stone is not cut by any human hand, so this indicates some divine activity, right? No human hands have touched it. So this is a God thing. All right. The fact that we've got gold, silver, bronze on top of iron mixed with clay, which is not a good solid mix. So this thing is kind of top heavy and it's fragile to begin with. Okay. So that's why a stone can be thrown and have all this destruction. The stone striking the feet indicates that this destruction will happen during the time signified by the iron part of the statue. Okay, so the stone is going to happen during this period, whatever that might be. All right. The rest, so these are crushed by the stone. The rest fall on the stone and are crushed. And the stone becomes a mountain, starts as something small and grows massively, fills the whole earth, worldwide kind of scope here. All the kingdoms. All right, next slide. The interpretation. Next slide. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power and the might and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. A little bit of flattery. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. All right. So it begins with a lot of flattery. You, O King of kings, to you belongs all glory, might, power, etc., etc., etc. You've been given all that you survey. The children of men are in your hands, yada, yada, yada. So, a little flattery never hurts. It's always a good thing when dealing with a king. But also puts him at ease because this is not great news for him. I mean, it's not like terrible, you are going to be judged specifically. I mean, it's kind of a general thing. But it's not great. So he is kind of putting him at ease. You know, he's a little bit greasing the wheels here so that it goes down a little bit better. Adds in a little bit of theological teaching about the source of his power. The God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the glory, the might. Okay, he's delivered all this to Nebuchadnezzar. He's given all things. He has made Nebuchadnezzar the king, but also kind of putting in there, God, though, the God of the heavens is your authority here. And says, okay, the head, you are the head. You are the head of gold. Now, each of these is a kingdom, right? But what is the head a kingdom, or is it Nebuchadnezzar?
He's the head of the kingdom.
Right. Yes. So yes, correct answer. He's alluding to both. I mean, but Nebuchadnezzar is Babylon. Now this is additional kind of more flattery. Like, you are Babylon. You are the kingdom. So as the kingdom goes, or so as you go, so goes the kingdom. So he does identify he's still, and he places, the vision puts Nebuchadnezzar as the head, the top. So he's like, oh, all right, cool. These other kingdoms come after him. They're inferior. It doesn't say why, just that they're inferior. Okay. Until finally this one is the one who crushes, really comes in, crushes, but there's something weird about this one in that this has the ability to crush, but it's also pretty brittle, right? So there's some fragility there. It's a mixture of peoples, clay and iron together. So they come together, but they don't really blend completely. Who do you think this kingdom is referring to?
Rome.
Almost certainly Rome. I mean, they're the kingdom who comes in, crushes, all this. They're the ones who bring in all sorts of peoples. They don't really mix very well. This is why, Pilate did not want to go to Jerusalem. The Jews were not mixing well with Rome. So you got Babylon up here. The one who comes over and takes over after Babylon would be Persia. And they were a great kingdom. After them, you could probably say Greece. And then after Greece, obviously, comes Rome. It's most likely what it is. There are different interpretations. This is likely what it is. So it's pretty simple, right? Next slide. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. So here we get the lesson, is God establishes his kingdom. Nebuchadnezzar, your kingdom will eventually fall. Which, it's not a traitorous thing to say. Nebuchadnezzar will die. And if he's Babylon, well then, yeah, okay. And this is the way of things. Kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall. This kingdom will fall, this kingdom will fall, this kingdom will fall, this kingdom will fall. But this kingdom that begins with a stone, which comes and strikes where? During the time of Rome. So who do you think this little stone is? There we go. Perfect answer. So yeah, Jesus comes, crushes this, and from him grows this huge mountain that becomes the overarching kingdom that usurps the entire world, becomes the world, right? So God will establish his kingdom. It will start off small, but encompass everything, and it will last forever. Okay? A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. So he's saying this is what's going to happen. This is the future. Kingdoms will rise, kingdoms will fall, but God's kingdom lasts forever and ever. Amen. That's the dream. Very simple. The dream is not, it's not complicated. It's nothing like, ooh. It's like, we know this, right? Now, of course, they didn't. But he's just saying, yes, there will be, and later on we're going to get a lot clearer picture of Jesus. But, yeah, very, very simple. And, of course, this calls to mind things like 1 Peter chapter 2. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifice acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And Luke 20, but he looked directly at them and said, What then is this that is written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. Which is exactly what he says it does. The stone falls on Rome, on the world, crushes sin, death, and the devil. And what happens? Everyone who falls then on the stone, crushed or broken into pieces. So, if anything, this is just him relaying Luke 20 to him. He's getting a little bit of the gospel. So yeah, the kingdom in Jesus, which, Jesus, if you want to go for more parallels, Jesus and his kingdom are virtually indistinguishable, right? Jesus is the kingdom. The kingdom is Jesus. The kingdom looks like Jesus and all that. So what did he say? Nebuchadnezzar is Babylon. So even at the very beginning, he's drawing this parallel between you are indistinguishable from your kingdom, and you're going to die. Jesus is indistinguishable from his kingdom, and he'll live forever. So we do have some nice extra parallels going on there. Questions, comments? We have, one more page. We're there. We can finish it. All right. I think. Are we there?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Next slide. Verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you've been able to reveal this mystery." Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over a whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. All right, so Nebuchadnezzar's blown away. He's thrilled that Daniel could figure it out. And notice he doesn't throw himself before God. He doesn't offer offerings to God. Who does he offer them to? Daniel. So it's not like Nebuchadnezzar has this come to Jesus moment. He doesn't. He's like, "Ooh, Daniel, okay, you can manipulate your God. Great, I like this."
But he did say that.
He does say that truly,
Your God.
right, is God of gods and Lord of kings, revealer of mysteries. But that doesn't indicate faith. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges truth. Doesn't mean he agrees with it. It doesn't mean he's like, "Oh, I believe now." He's like, "Oh, wow, your God is amazing. All right." And so he promotes Daniel to be like, "Hey, if your God is that great and you can reveal that stuff, I'm going to keep you around because I could use that." So he's not a believer. This is not a conversion moment. I can acknowledge, perfect example. On the last day, everybody's going to acknowledge God, right? Every tongue will confess, every knee will bow. Does that mean everybody is going to heaven or everybody is going to the new creation? No. It means the believers are going to say, "Jesus is God, hallelujah." The unbelievers are going to say, "Jesus is God, oh no! We were so wrong." And it goes down from there. So this is where Nebuchadnezzar is. He acknowledges like, "Hey, your God is something special. We can use that." Daniel is elevated in status. More parallels here. We see the same thing with Joseph in Egypt, where Joseph interprets dreams, and he gets appointed second in command of all of Egypt. Now Daniel interprets dreams, gets promoted over at least a chief prefect over all the wise men, a whole province of Babylon. And then he stays in the king's court. But the cool thing is he appeals for his three friends. Never forget your friends. Never forget the guys who got you there. And says, "Let my three friends be appointed as well." So they get provincial authority over areas. Daniel stays in the court, the king's court. The end. Voila.
That had to be huge for the Judeans.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. That would have been good for them, especially as more of them are coming in, brought in from exile to see one of their own in such a position of authority, which, I suppose if you're being cynical, you'd be like, sell out. Or you're like, "Oh, okay, we've got somebody who will be looking out for us." Which, if you want to get more parallels, you go right to, something like Esther, where we get the people of God in positions of authority who are looking out for their people. But yeah, this is a huge deal for the people of Judah, especially as, they're taken from their land, they're taken from their home. And here's Daniel, who, they'll hear rumblings about like, "Oh, and he's remaining true to God." It's like, yes, he's been appointed, but he's faithful. He has not rejected God. God is still with us, preserving us. This is a very hopeful thing. Daniel is, a great type of Christ in this example where he's, he is the focal point where he's pointing to God and reminding them. So yeah. Yes?
Is there more to Daniel and what we're reading here?
Well, we got
Doesn't he?
10 more
end
10
up
more
in a-
chapters.
We got what?
We got 10 more chapters to go.
Oh, that's right.
Oh yeah, we got the fiery furnace, we got the lion's den, we got all sorts of good stuff.
I thought I missed something.
No, you didn't miss anything. You missed the boring one. It was just food.
Sacrifice the sheep,
Sacrifice a sheep?
the one you had last.
Oh no, he's still.
He's on the other.
Oh, he's still back there. He's.
He put him
Yeah.
in the other
I thought he
pasture.
got sacrificed.
No.
No, you know how I
We
knew
kept the
he was
sheep.
there without looking? He told me. So.
Oh yeah.
He said, he come up and said, the sheep was.
They
still
like my drawings. Yes. All right. Hey.
Sheep that we saw
What's that?
after the first sheep that we saw.
Well, yeah.
turned him into a ram.
We don't talk about those. All right. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
I wonder why God gave Nebuchadnezzar such a special opportunity to become a believer.
Why did he give him such a special opportunity? Don't know.
We're gonna find out.
If I had to wager a guess, like for us reading it, for back then, you got a whole different thing going on. But for us to like, as we read this text and to ask that question, I would probably venture something to the effect of showing how, the word does go out to everybody. And it's like everybody has the opportunity to receive this word. That God is not withholding it. And especially in the context of where, like when Jesus comes onto the scene and, the Syrophoenician woman who's like begging him and he's like, go away. And she says, but even, and he says that the bread is not given for the dogs, it's for the children. And she says, but even the dogs eat the crumbs. That initially Jesus is sent to the people of Israel. It is for them. But it's expanded, obviously, to the Gentiles. So if anything, you could say that this is kind of a foreshadowing of, the word comes to all. The word is there for everybody. It's just not everybody's going to hear. Seeing they won't see. Hearing they won't hear. But through the word of God, those will know.
That's true. I'm sure the story spread
Oh, yeah.
about what happened there.
Oh, I'm sure. And I mean, the story, I mean, you got to imagine the wise men were probably relieved, and a certain chunk were probably like, yay, go Daniel. I'm sure there was jealousy. There was a lot of, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. Well, not weird, this happens now. But yeah, that would probably be my guess as to that opportunity.
Later on, he's gonna show him, he's got him pretty up there, pretty high.
Mhm.
He's gonna knock him down.
Oh yeah.
And use
Oh yeah,
him as
Daniel
an
doesn't have an
example.
easy road.
Using him as an example, probably.
Yeah. Well, and the whole thing is that Daniel, throughout his ups and downs, is he remains faithful, and that's the key. It's like it doesn't matter if he's a governor or in a lion's den. And that was the thing with Daniel, was like he had prayed to God for mercy, whether I live or die. God is the one I need to appeal to. So certainly that's a big teaching that we get from Daniel too. Cool. And only like 9 minutes over. We're good. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all. Good times, good stuff. And thank you, everybody online. Sorry, Mom. Didn't mean to offend. And we'll pick up chapter 3 next Wednesday.
I thought you
All
said
right.
kick the can
Kick the can.
down the road.
That would have been smarter. All right, we can go to the final slide there, buddy.